Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Daniella Gibbs Léger on Two Broads Talking Politics.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I'm on, as usual, with my co-host Sophy. Hey Sophy.
Hey Kelly.
And we are excited today to be joined by Daniella Gibbs Léger, who is the Executive Vice President of Communications and Strategy at the Center for American Progress. Hi Daniella.
Hi guys.
So super excited to be talking to you on this very slow news week.
Nothing happening at all.
Nothing,
so boring.
Nothing happening at all. So I thought maybe we could start in with a little bit about you and your background and how you got started in the work that you're doing.
Sure. So it's a really long story, so I won't tell it because this is a shorter podcast. Basically, everyone in my family, I have two older siblings, we all got really into politics from really we were born because my parents just believed in being involved in the political process and following the news, and we'd sit around the dinner table every night and talk about what had happened. And I'm going to date myself with this anecdote, but like one of my earliest political memories is knowing at age 5 that I was really mad that Ronald Reagan won the presidency. So politics has sort of been in my blood for years, and I'm just really fortunate to get to do the work that I do.
Excellent. And so for people who might not be quite as aware of what Center for American Progress does, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So we are a think tank based in Washington, D.C. We have two arms. There's the Center for American Progress and our advocacy arm, the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And basically we are, like I said, we're a think tank. We develop policy, progressive policies to better the lives of all Americans. And through our action funds, we sort of put those policy ideas into action. And we work. It's a little bit more political on that side. We don't endorse candidates or anything like that, but we do engage in the process and hold our elected leaders accountable for the things that they say and do. I work in communications. I have been lucky enough to do 2 stints at CAP with a break for 2.5 years in the Obama White House, which was incredible. And what I really love about working here is that, fundamentally at the end of the day, we are a think tank. So it is about the policies and ideas, but we also understand that those ideas are great, but they won't do anybody any good sitting on a shelf somewhere. So how are you going to move them into action? How are you going to move a policy into a law? How are you going to change the conversation around something like healthcare? Well, you have to invest in communications and outreach, and that's something that I think we do exceptionally well. And I'm not just saying that because I run our communications team. It was exceptional before I did it. and we just try to carry on the excellence that this place was founded upon.
And you get to co-host a podcast too.
I do. I co-host a podcast with my lovely colleague Ed Chung called The Tent. And it is, as you think, we talk about the big progressive tent. Some days it's a circus, but I like to think mostly it's just a big tent. We, talk about what's happening, the news of the day, have really interesting guests. Obviously, the last couple of weeks, it's been all impeachment all the time.
So this is probably a stupid question, but I've always wondered this. How does a think tank work? Like, I understand that you create, you're researching and creating policy, but is it literally people sitting around thinking all day? Like, what does it look like on the ground?
And Sophie's like, if it is, how do I join?
Right. So there is a lot of that. There are people who sit and think. We're a very collaborative place. So we have around 19 different policy teams. But we try to make sure that they aren't all working in silos because all of our policies are interconnected to each other. So we have a team that works on combating poverty, but obviously they work very closely with our econ team because a lot of the tools that you need to do that are economics-based or tax policy-based. They work very closely with our race and ethnicity team because unfortunately a disproportionate number of people of color fall into the category of people who are in poverty. So they work closely with their education team because you know that if you get a good start, a good foundation of your education, that can help reduce your chances of becoming or possibly living in poverty. So all these things are interconnected. So we, like I said, we work very collaboratively across our policy teams. But yes, there are people who do sit and they think about, all right, I want to figure out how to create an immigration system that is based on a rule of law that treats people humanely. In other words, is the exact opposite of what this administration is doing. And so they work with their colleagues, they work with people outside of this building, other experts, and they created a rule of law framework that is based in progressive values about how we view immigration and how we understand that immigrants, are a very important part of the fabric of this country. But we are also a nation of law, so how you reconcile those two things. So there's a lot of individual thinking and work that happens, but there's a lot of collaboration within teams, across teams. And then they work closely with the communications team, our government affairs team that works with not just members on the Hill, but also with mayors, with governors, with other state legislators to push these ideas out and to work with them to implement these ideas at the local level. So that's how we operate. Like I said, we put a lot of resources into our outreach, into communications, our podcast, our video outreach, booking our experts on TV. This is something that I think that CAP really got ahead of in terms of what other think tanks do. Years ago, and now we see other think tanks sort of catching up to us and investing in those outreach properties as well. So that's how we operate. That's how we look at being a think tank. We're also an action tank.
I think you've even more convinced Sophie that this is a place for her.
Yeah. Literally going to go and look up job openings.
You can go to AmericanProgress.org.
So we're on the recent heels of elections, state legislative elections that happened earlier this month in 2019. And of course, we're all looking ahead to 2020 and the kinds of things that we might see going into 2020. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of what we did see in 2019 and what that might tell us. You obviously work for an organization that values progressive ideals. There's no secret that Sophie and I also care quite a bit about those, but there's this sort of large conversation going on in the Democratic Party about, do we tack toward the center to get those people? Do we lean into progressive ideals? I think it's a false dichotomy. But, what did we see in 2019 and what might that tell us about 2020?
I think what we saw in 2019 was when you talk to all voters, when you give voters something to vote for and not just vote against, when you are clear in what you believe in and what you will do, people will go vote. Like, people are angry right now. And progressives and Democrats especially are really angry about what's happening. But that doesn't mean that all you can be is anti-Trump or anti-GOP. And it also doesn't mean that you should spend all of your time trying to reach out to voters who, are pretty much like entrenched in the, Trump camp, the Trump side of things. I think you have to speak to everybody, but you have to focus, I think, on those voters who are either persuadable or who would be with you if they had a reason to get out and vote. So when you look at what happened in Virginia, also running good candidates helps. Like, let's just start there at the baseline. There are brilliant people who, if they had enough support, and it doesn't have to be financial support, but if they had enough support, they would run for something. And so finding those people and cultivating them and giving them a support system helps. And you saw that in Virginia, where over the last several cycles, you've seen more and more people running and fewer uncontested races, even in places where the Republican, the last time they won by 10, 15, 20 points, but they were a lot of times they'd run unchallenged, but they were being challenged every time. And that's how you build a movement, and that's how you build to victory, is that you make people fight for every single vote that they get, even if it seems like it's an uphill battle, because sometimes you might surprise yourself and actually you might win those battles. I was at an event with Stacey Abrams, who I just love, adore. I think she is one of the most remarkable political talents I've ever seen in my life. And full disclosure, she also sits on our board of directors. And she just tells such a great story about how, while she didn't win in Georgia, and I think there are a lot of reasons for that, mostly voter suppression and Brian Kemp being the crooked crook that he is, but she won more votes than any Democrat had ever won statewide. And she did it not by modulating who she was or changing her stump speech to, reach out to one group of voters here or there. Like, she stayed true to who she was. She had a message that resonated with everybody. Sure, you can emphasize one piece of it here, one piece of it there, but there was a through line that ran through everything that she ever talked about. And I think that is a lesson that all Democrats and progressives can learn, is that if you feel like you have to change your message when you're talking to, white rural voters versus, voters from, an urban center, then maybe you need to rethink what it is that you're doing, because she shows that it's possible that you don't have to do that.
I like that you mentioned persuadable voters. I think that's something that we need to work on as progressives, not necessarily ceding the way that our issues are discussed to Republicans, but rather like persuading people of our actual policy ideas. Do you have any sort of suggestions for the best way to do that?
Well, I think that we need to break ourselves out of this binary choice that you either just motivate your base or you reach out to the 30% of hardcore Trump supporters, who are, I'm sorry, in my opinion, those people are never going to vote with you, for you. Just leave them alone. That's 30%. He's got them. They're in the bag. They're watching Fox News every single day. That's great. But then there are the people who, for whatever reason, voted for Obama twice and then decided to vote for Trump. And where I differ with some people is that I don't think you need to spend all your energy there. I don't even think you need to spend half your energy there. But I think you need to spend some energy there, because I think there are lessons that can be learned in why those people did that could help you with everything else that you're trying to do. But I definitely get really frustrated with a lot of the coverage that I see in media sometimes, where it's they cover these voters over and over again. The diner in Ohio where, Joe voted for Obama and then he voted for Trump, and, Sally voted for Obama and then she didn't vote. And I think those profiles are important, but they shouldn't be 95% of what I see and 95% of what we're talking about. So I think it's important to, like I said, talk to persuadable voters, think about why it is that they voted the way they are. What do they care about? What do they care about right now? And how can we move them? They're disappointed in Trump. Obviously, a lot of them are disgusted by him. But how do we move them into being Democratic and progressive voters? That's important. But at the end of the day, for me, you dance with the ones that brought you. And the ones that brought you are the Obama coalition, and that are people of color, young people, college-educated whites. And how do you make sure that that coalition is solid and strong as it was in 2012? Because if that coalition had turned out in 2016 the way it did in 2012, we'd be talking about a President Hillary Clinton right now. And that is not to say that I put blame on any one group of people, because there are 16 different reasons why Hillary Clinton did not win in 2016, but this is one of them. So I hope that through 2018 and 2019, that Democrats and progressives are learning the right lessons of which voters you are talking to, where you are putting your resources and your energy, and that you are not ignoring your base voters because you think they're always going to be with you, because 2016 taught you that they're not.
Yeah, so to that end, there's this ongoing conversation about whether women are electable to the presidency, and it sounds like from what you're saying, and of course it's biased by what I think in the first place, but that we can actually inspire more voters if we are not choosing, the white man or whatever, as the presidential nominee. And I'm not going to make you go on record with who you support or anything, but, what do you think of that dynamic? I mean, it sure seems like in 2018 and 2019 that we're seeing lots of women and people of color winning down ballot races. Do you think that translates up to the presidency?
Yeah, I think it can. I am officially neutral and actually unofficially neutral too. I haven't made up my mind. But I think it can translate up. There are bigger hurdles and barriers at the presidential level. And you hear these conversations that keep happening over likability and electability, I think, is sometimes really code for likability or just being a woman. And it's super frustrating, as a woman, period. It's really annoying to have those conversations. But it worries me a little bit that there are people on the progressive side who buy into this notion that the only way that we can win is if we nominate somebody who is, like Trump, or if we, nominate somebody who is the antithesis of Hillary Clinton. I think we're buying into their arguments and we're turning it into a self-fulfilling prophecy if we keep doing that. What is most important is nominating somebody who inspires and will motivate people to go out to polls. Who is the candidate who is going to get the person who maybe, has voted but has never gone out to canvass or done a phone bank? Who's going to be that person who will take that individual and push them to the next level of civic participation? That to me is what's most important.
So we can't avoid talking impeachment altogether because it's so there. It's all we're thinking about. So, as someone who worked in a presidential administration, what are your thoughts on just how abnormal what is going on is? It's so strange, and I feel like I'm living in an alternative universe on a different plane in the upside down every single day with this administration. The fact that we are going through, I think, our fourth impeachment in our history is a really, really, really big deal. Huge, monumentous. But because it's Trump, and because he probably does an impeachable offense before he gets out of bed in the morning, I don't know that people quite understand what moment we're in right now and understand the gravity of what we're talking about and the gravity of what he has done. Because, and I don't think this was purposeful on his part or his administration's part. I just think they're so terrible that when you commit all these crimes and when you do all these things that are impeachable offenses, when you do the really, really bad thing that is so obvious and blatant, asking a foreign power to interfere in our elections, that people are like, oh, yeah, that's bad. Oh, we're going to impeach him over this? So it's really, this administration drives me to drink sometimes, Yep.
a lot. But I am glad that we are here, and that if I can pull a silver lining from the impeachment hearings so far, is that it has restored a little bit of my faith in humanity to see some of these career officials, put their careers on the line. They could have hidden behind, the threats basically from Secretary Pompeo and Donald Trump and not testified. But they did. So there are maybe some decent people still left in this political orbit of Donald Trump. We'll see what happens next. But yeah, it's not normal. This is not normal. And this is the thing that I scream at the TV a lot when I hear the media covering something that the fact that he had to give $2 million, I think, in fines because his foundation stole money. The president of the United States, I'm backing away from the microphone, his foundation stole money for veterans. That's not fucking normal. And it got covered for like a second. Do you see what I mean about wanting a drink? Oh, my goodness. Sorry. Anyway.
I think we all need to head to the bar now.
Yeah.
So my question that I've been asking everybody lately, because it's so much top of my mind, is what happens after 2020? I think we're also focused on the next year, and with good reason. It's hugely important, not just the presidency, not just impeachment, but, up and down the ballot, the Senate, everything is really important. Yeah. But, as someone who's been at this work for a while, what do we do after 2020? Let's say we do defeat Donald Trump and everyone's like, oh, all right, bullet dodged, and it goes back to their lives. How do we keep up the momentum? How do we make sure people keep staying involved?
Yeah, I think if Trump is defeated in 2020, there is so much work that has to be done to try and reverse some of the bad things that have happened. There's a lot that's been going on at the agency level that gets absolutely no coverage outside of very niche media, like EPA, HHS, rolling back regulations, Department of Transportation, things that are making our lives less safe. So the next administration is going to have to come in and immediately hit the ground running to fix some of that stuff. On a bigger scale, I think if the next Democratic president needs to have the most solid of agendas and big agendas, because there's so much, like I said, that we have to fix. It's going to take big structural changes to do some of that and to prevent some of this really bad stuff from happening in the future. And so it's important to have those ideas, but not just that, to have a plan of activation. So like you said, all these people who will hopefully get engaged and turn out and vote, how are you then turning around and getting them to push for your legislative agenda? Because let's be real, you're going to have a very short window to get anything done before people start talking about the 2022 congressional elections and members start thinking about running for re-election. So it is crucial that while people are, running for president, when we have a nominee next year, hopefully before the convention, that they are dual tracking it, and I'm sure that they will be. They're trying to defeat Donald Trump, but then they are thinking about what that robust policy, what executive actions they can take, but also assuming Democrats either, keep the House and take back the Senate or maybe narrow the margin in the Senate, like what policies are they going to be pushing through? And then what is their plan to actually get it done? Because we're only going to recover from the Trump presidency if the next president comes in and shows the American people that this is what it means to have a progressive government and look at all the good it's done in your lives. That's the only way we survive this.
So, Daniella, you're the mother of a toddler. And, I think a lot about how we raise kids right now during such a toxic time when we are also distracted by what is happening. So what is your approach to that? How do you deal with that particularly thorny issue?
Well, I am fortunate enough that my toddler is under 3, so he doesn't quite understand what's happening. I think, unfortunately, he recognizes who President Trump is, because I think I heard him say Trump the other day. I was like, oh, God, you need to stop watching so much TV. But, I talk to a lot of my parent friends who have slightly older kids, and for them, it's just reinforcing that yes, you should respect the office of the presidency, but that respect is a two-way street. And that if somebody is disrespecting that office, then you can treat them differently than you would somebody like Barack Obama. And that it is not okay to mimic bad behavior no matter where it comes from, even if it comes from your parents or the president of the United States. That these are you have a set of rules and morals that sort of guide the way you interact with other human beings. and that nothing should really push you off of that path. And it's easy for them to say this and for them to like instill that in their children. It is harder for them to deal with the other kids who don't have parents who are having this conversation. And, you know, there's nothing more heartbreaking than, you know, my mom friends who are Latinx who talk about the kids who tell their kids to go back to Mexico, these are kids who, it doesn't matter that they were born here, but they were, you know, or, you know, even any kids of color who are being bullied, or who are telling like, oh, you know, Trump's president now, so you guys are screwed. I mean, these are things that are coming out of the mouths of like 6-year-olds. They learn that at home. And it's hard to combat that, and it's hard to comfort your child when they're hearing this from their peer. So I think building resiliency in our kids, it's like heartbreaking to even think that like this is yet another conversation that you have to have with your children so young. But I think it's important. And I don't think that it goes away if Trump loses next year, because I think unfortunately you've had like now kids that it's in their bloodstream and they see it from their parents. And just because there may be a progressive president in office doesn't mean that they aren't going to take that learned bad behavior and continue it. So like building that resiliency in our children, I think is really important.
Yeah, and you know, my kids are slightly older. They're 8 and 5, and one of the hardest things for me is, you know, they get it that Trump is not a good guy, and that we can think certain things about him, but they almost take things so far the other way that they want to make all Republicans villains. They talk about you know, like punching Donald Trump, and you know, and so it's sort of a constant like, no, this is a person we deeply disagree with. I don't want him to be president, but I don't wish physical harm on anyone, you know. And so it's sort of having to have those constant discussions. It's exhausting.
It really is, and it's really tough because there's like that 5% Jersey side of me is like, yeah, kid, that's right. No, that's not right. Nope, not appropriate.
Oh, sure. I'm not saying there's no part of me that feels that way. Just I can't let my kids know that.
Exactly. That's for the mommy text chain.
Well, Daniella, if people would like to learn more about Center for American Progress or listen to your podcast, how can they do that?
They can follow the podcast along at The Tent Pod. That is at The Tent Pod on Twitter. They can follow me. I'm at dgibber123. I talk about a lot more than just politics, so be forewarned. And you can follow CAP online at CAP Action for our C4 and at AmProg for our C3.
Excellent. We'll put links to those up on our website, and we'll tag you on Twitter when we post this episode as well. So thank you so much for joining us. This was a really fun conversation, as terrible as a lot of the topics are.
I know. Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.